Hello everyone, welcome back to the Analyst for 25 March 2025, where we will be discussing 7 important articles from the Hindu and the Indian Express pertaining to UPSC Civil Service Examination. In the first section of analysis, we'll be taking up food wastage and the various issues out of the same in the country. Also, what are the solutions and the government initiatives in the same. In the second article, we'll be looking into the localized urban agenda, where we'll be trying to understand what are the various issues pertaining to urban government schemes in the country and also what are the solutions to solve the same. In the second part, we'll be taking up the simplified articles, which are extremely crucial for your upcoming prelims 2025 examination, so stay tuned. Hello all, I hope you all are doing well, and we'll be starting today's discussion particularly with reference to the issue of food wastage in the country. And this is actually following a very important editorial on the same, where accordingly to this editorial, we find that India is ranking among the top contributors to the food wastage issue in the entire world. And this is actually according to a report by the United Nations Environment Program, that is a report of Food Waste Index report, which is very important for your prelims, because we have had so many instances where UPSC asks various reports in the news. Now, for prelims, we already found out one important relevance. We also need to understand the overall issue of food wastage, the various initiatives for the prelims examination. Also, we need to understand the various environment implications for the same. Finally, in GS2, we also have the issue of poverty and hunger, where we can directly attribute the same in this matter. But before we go into the details, we firstly need to understand some important terms pertaining to this topic. Firstly, we have food loss, which is attributable to the high amount of dry matter, right, in the food, and also the low quality of food. For example, imagine wheat, right? If that particular wheat crop is having too much of dry content, dry organic matter, and also the nutritional benefits, the nutritional particular qualities of that particular wheat is not up to the mark, then we find that it is attributable to food loss. It generally happens in the country and also in the rest of the world due to many issues such as infrastructural issues at the farm, such as irrigation issues and so on. We also have logistical issues such as transportation, storage and distribution and marketing. We also have the technological issues due to which sometimes we cannot even detect the dry matters and the low quality of food. Also, we find that natural disasters such as heavy rainfall, flooding and so on, they also impact the heavy losses to food. Secondly, we have the topic of food waste. This generally means that some food, for example milk and say some other processed food in the market, they're spoiled beyond their expiry dates, or they're spoiled due to their intrinsic factors and so on. So that is actually leading to various issues of food waste in our retail markets, restaurants and so many other places, even in our households. Now, when we talk about the main causes here, we generally find sometimes the market forces of demand and supply of food, they generally do not match. Simply imagine that huge number of restaurants we have, or say the huge number of a particular brand that we have for a particular food item. So it means that the supply of food items are too much. That is not equal to the demand of the same. Also, we find that the consumers sometimes, especially from the affluent sections, from the rich countries, they typically waste food on a very massive scale. As we can also see the various countries, for example, Italy, Canada, Germany, UK, which are all Western countries and also developed nations, we also find that these countries are actually wasting a lot of food per capita. And finally, the eating habits of the various households, they also determine how much food we waste on an annual basis. And finally, when we come to the concept of food, it has been defined by this particular index that this includes edible and inedible parts discarded from the food supply chain, from manufacturing and retail to the restaurants and finally our households. This generally differs from the food loss concept that we have just studied, that it is actually occurring earlier in the supply chain due to issues such as poor storage, transportation that we have discussed. But food wastage is combining the concept of your food loss and also the food wastage. Now, we are in a position to understand the statistics in the entire world. When we compare with 2022 with 2019, that is a pre-COVID year, we have seen that after a few years only, the food waste has increased from 931 million tons to 1.05 billion tons. That is actually a huge number that is attributable to around 20% of the total available food stock in the entire world. So this is quite concerning. Also, when we find the sector-wise distribution of the total wastage in the entire world, we find that we households contribute most of the food that we attribute as of now, followed by the food services such as restaurants and the various retail chains, which have increased over the last 4 years. And also we have found that the retail shops, the various malls and the various, say, distribution centers, they also attribute for around 12% of the wastage as of now. Now, when we compare the country, we have seen about the Western nations, right? The developed nations, the rich countries which waste a lot of food. When we talk about India, right? India is attributed of wasting food to around the tune of 55 kg per capita per households annually. So that is what we understand by the volume of food wastage, which is quite significant for a developing country like India, for which we need to understand the impacts right now. The first impact is obviously the monetary loss, that is the economic loss over a period of time, that is leading into the loss of trillions of dollars for India annually. Also, when we talk about the food insecurity in the country, we also have a large proportion of the people who are vulnerable, who do not have access to proper food, who suffer from malnutrition, hunger, and extreme amount of poverty. They find that they do not get accessible amount of food, and that is generally attributed to a supply chain, overall supply chain of distribution of food in the country. Generally, we have the people who can pay properly, and then only they can get nutritious food for them. But for the others who do not have purchasing power, they are left to the fringes of the food insecurity paradigm. And also, when we talk about the third thing, which is a kind of an environmental factor, we find that food wastes attribute to around 10 to 12% of the total municipal waste, which is a common thing that we see on our roads and our bypasses every single day, right? From which we also find a very potential amount of greenhouse gas known as methane, which is attributed from these particular landfills, which are extremely much more potent than even our commonly known carbon dioxide. That means that methane is having much more higher global warming potential than carbon dioxide, right? Next, when we talk about the annual amount of greenhouse gases, the overall amount of greenhouse gases, food waste alone attribute to 8 to 10% again. And finally, when we talk about our agriculture, our farmland, we waste a lot of our fresh water, fertilizers, croplands, and also the landfills, the land that we need to dedicate for the various municipal food wastes. They eat into the agricultural resources. That means that we use, for example, around 20% of our fertilizers on the crops, which will be potentially be in the future generally waste. So that is why we understand that despite the various things, we are not able to mobilize resources properly. And between all of this, a very important index comes to our mind, that is a 2024 Global Hunger Index, which is quite criticized in the media. You let me know in the comments why it is criticized so much. But despite that, we need to talk about Indian rank. That is, we have to understand we are having a score of around 27.3, which is a very abysmal score, a very disappointing score. We are ranked with countries such as North Korea, Afghanistan, and also various other least developing economies when it comes to hunger in the country. So by this we can understand the nature of the food insecurity in the country, and also the volume of food wastage and how we can reduce it to improve the various aspects in the country. Now, we understand that over a period of time, the government obviously have had taken various initiatives in this matter. Now, firstly, when I talk about the initiative which is about fixing the various origin, that is the farmlands, we have the initiative known as the Pradhan Mantri Kisan Sampada Yojana, because it is generally from the farmlands we find that the food loss and the various food wastage issues are surfacing from. So for this, the government of India as of now have come up with various incentives to boost cold storage in the country, to have proper value addition primarily for the food processing industries in the country, where we can actually have also the food wastes, for example wasted vegetables and apples and other kinds of fruits. We can send those kind of spoiled items to the food processing industry, who can actually process it to get various other types of beneficial items. Next, we also have various preservation infrastructure as a part of this particular scheme. We also have envisaged to set up various mega food parks which are actually trying to aim at building a proper amount of cluster-like development for the food processing industries. Also, we have the impetus to have better amount of agro processing centers, again a processing center to process the various foods and particularly reduce the food wastage in the country. And finally, operational greens, which is trying to boost the production of extremely important vegetables. And finally, we also have the FSSAI effort, which is the Food Safety Authority of the country, which is looking into the various aspects of food safety. Despite that, it is also looking into the various aspects of food wastage too, particularly through a campaign and through an initiative known as the Safe Food, and Share Joy, which is actually trying to have a network of various enterprises, restaurants, organizations, which will be looking at the issue of tackling the food wastage. For example, if a particular restaurant is having high amount of food wastage, then that particular restaurant can contact some NGO, some charity organizations to distribute the excess food to reduce the food wastage. Also, we find so many awareness campaigns in our daily newspapers, right, published by the FSSAI to boost the awareness to reduce food waste in the country. Next, we also have the various provisions, obviously, which are very important for the country to maintain the buffer stock, which is an emergency stock of the food grains, essential food grains and other food items in the country. We also have the same under the National Food Security Act, the same as in promoting the aspect of food security in the country via legally guaranteed right to food in the country. Finally, we have some other initiatives such as the 1, 2, 3 pledge initiative to actually have better amount of coordination between the governments, businesses, chefs and various other important actors in the food system to commit to reduce the food wastage issue. We also have the United Nations Global Food Loss and Waste Protocol. Now, we have these initiatives. Obviously, these are actually very beneficial on the long run, but we need some systemic issues to be solved and also some individual solutions we need to adopt on our own. Firstly, when I talk about the various solutions at the systemic level, so the various government initiatives, the government must now primarily focus on the various farming related issues which attribute to food wastage, such as the government can have better investments in biotechnology to have better amount of bioengineered crops in the country to reduce food wastage. We also need to ramp our cold storage because a lot of food waste is generally attributed due to poor and ill storage in the country. Also, for the same, we need to have efficient amount of transportation where we need to link the railways, waterways, airways for better amount of preservation in the country. Next, we also need to strengthen regulations that will be imposing stricter fines on various non-law abiding citizens which attribute to food wastage. And finally, we need to have better amount of food rescue programs too. Next, from a business and retail sector angle, we need to tackle food wastage at restaurants and various other retail places via food redistribution by connecting them with various charity organizations and so on. We also need to have proper amount of food labeling and ensure that the private sector is adhering to various government sectors food labeling and safety standards. We also need proper amount of inventory management for the private sector. For that, we can actually help the various startups, the various SSGs which are operating in this particular sector with more funding to have better amount of storage and inventory management. And finally, we need to devolve various amount of zero waste policies for this particular actors. For example, say private sector, retail, restaurants and so on. Also, we need to promote the awareness of food wastage in the country, and this can be done via government programs, newspapers, seminars and so on. Finally, when we talk about the international efforts, we can actually learn from two countries such as France and Denmark. France has this anti-food wastage law of 2016 for which there is a particular law in the country. That is also what we can adopt. And also we have the Denmark's We Food stores, where generally we find in Denmark some stores with a lot of food which has come from various nearby restaurants and so on, which otherwise would be attributed to food wastage. So we can have such model centers in the country too. Next, when we talk about the solutions at the individual level, we have to understand that food wastage is maybe a governmental issue, maybe a societal issue, maybe an issue from the private sector, but primarily it is the thing that we have to understand that starts with us. So on an individual level, we must be taking reforms such as smart meal planning and shopping. That means we should be very aware of our choices whenever we are trying to make our food choices, right? We must be having proper portion control. We must not be ordering too much whenever we are going to restaurants and so on with our friends, family members. Also, we need to have proper and efficient storage at our homes. If you are buying vegetables, if you are buying some food, ensure that your refrigerator is able to store that. Otherwise, it will be leading to food wastage. Also, there are many ways in which we can actually have some leftovers such as vegetable peels, some other food byproducts and so on, which we can use to have proper other kind of meals too. So that is also sometimes where we understand our traditional knowledge. Indians have used this kind of techniques of cooking using food leftovers for a long period of time. We can also try to adopt them rather than throwing the food leftovers away. Also, we can practice composting. If we have a backyard or a garden, we can actually try to dig and try to waste or dump the particular food waste in that particular location. And finally, we can also collaborate with various local NGOs and other societies to have food banks and also kind of donate to charities whenever we are having this issue of food wastage. So let us take all these better initiatives. But here, from our exam point of view, you please let me know what is the answers of this 2018 and 16 PYQs in the comments. And let me tell you, UPSC will be asking questions like this, which will be extremely basic, but yet for that you need effective revision. For your mains, you can practice this mains question as usual, and for your intro and conclusion, you can actually try to use directly what are the environmental impact of food loss and wastage from this particular figure. So let us write some answers also based on the discussion. So guys, in the next article, we are trying to understand what are the localized urban agenda and what are the various aspects that we need to keep in mind when we talk about the urban development in the country. Now, according to this article, India's urban areas are seeing urban metamorphosis. This means that the Indian cities are going from being traditional to modern Indian cities. And let me tell you that these kind of terms are extremely important and crucial for getting good marks in your mains examination too. And here, the main issue that the article is trying to highlight that all of the government schemes and programs that we have are fine. But the main issue with it is that we do not have a bottoms-up strategy. That is that the streets where the people live or the main voices of the people and the various aspirations for development in the urban areas are not sometimes matched. Correct? So this is where we need to focus more on the local voices and more focus on the local administration must be lead. This is the main context of the article. Now here, when we talk about the examination importance, we have to understand for prelims we have economic and social development, and also for GS1 and GS2 we have the topics of urbanization and the various issues out of the same. And finally, we need to also look into the GS2 issues of decentralization, that is a devolution of powers and finances up to the local levels, based on where we have to firstly now try to understand the evolution of urban areas and the various government initiatives where they have tried to transform in traditional Indian cities to modern Indian cities. As of now, we understand that from 2005 to 2014, we had a very important government scheme known as the Jawaharlal Nehru National Urban Renewal Mission, which were actually tried to boost the various infrastructural and the governmental reforms when it pertained to the various urban structures, such as building various overhead water tanks or having proper amount of government buildings or the repair and construction of some government schools and so on. We understand that in urban areas, this particular mission tried to be very effective. Over a period of time, we also have had so many government schemes, such as the Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, which is trying to give us affordable housing. Especially in the urban areas, it is trying to boost the various facilities for the slum dwellers by giving them proper amount of flats and residential areas. Apart from this, we also have the Amrut cities, which is looking into all of the aspects of water supply, sewerage, septic management, stormwater drainage, green spaces. Also, we have proper amount of rules and the various standards for urban transport and the various imperatives for skilling in the urban areas. So we have the Amrut cities, which are also looking at the particular areas for urban development. Next, we have the Swachh Bharat Mission, which is looking into the aspect of sanitation and waste management and making our cities clean and greener. Next, we also have the smart cities mission, which is always in the news, which is actually trying to transform 100 Indian cities into modern cities, such as where the quality of life will be better over a period of time. Finally, we have the various metro railway projects in the various metropolitan cities, various tier 2 cities also. As of now, we are seeing some of the metro projects which are coming up, which is actually building high cost infrastructure of metro railways for better amount of connectivity between the urban areas. So these are all the initiatives that the government is taking over a period of time. Mainly here, the central government is taking all these initiatives. That is why we have the major criticism that all of these initiatives are actually following this top to down approach. That is when the center is planning all the initiatives, center is giving the various kinds of funds, the various aspects of grants. Also, it is expecting the state government to implement it, and finally the local government to execute the plan at the local city level. But here we have the main disconnect between the demand and aspirations of the local people, between the capacity and the supply chain mechanism of the local government, between the top level planning and the various government schemes. That is where we have to understand we have this major theme. When we talk about the urban development recently, we always see the center versus state role in urbanization. Now, to understand why or how does the center intervene in all these projects is generally, we have to understand center believes, the government of India, the center believes that our Indian cities are right now the engines of economic growth. That is why economic growth is a national agenda in which the central government seeks to also participate via the various government initiatives for the betterment of the Indian cities. And generally the central government believes that if we develop the infrastructure of these particular Indian cities, generally it will be leading to better amount of job creation and better amount of engine of economic growth. That is why we understand the government right now is focused on building and constructing metros, highways, airports, so on. That is why we find that the urban funding is generally via the centrally sponsored schemes, where we have some of the central component contribution. We also have the state government contribution here. So if at all the central government is trying to have a particular initiative, we have to understand it is also the partnership where the state government have to contribute some of the funds. But we have to understand the rules of the game, the various standards, the various applications of how these projects will be implemented. It is generally decided by the center. So this is where we have to understand that this is kind of posing some rigidity issue when we talk about the local levels implementing the government schemes. Firstly. Secondly, we also have the issue coming from our Finance Commission's conditionalities. Our 15th Finance Commission have actually tied some of the grants, or for example, we generally understand the Finance Commission is looking at the distribution of the monies that is distributed between the center and the states, and also between the states. We have to understand that some of the monies can be in form of grants. Grants means that some urban local body can actually get some grants for some proper amount of urban facility only if that particular urban area or that particular state governments have taken some proper amount of reforms based on some conditions. So this is also with reference to the 15th Finance Commission, where some of the grants are made conditional, which is reducing the city autonomy over a period of time. So if I can sum up some of the concerns and challenges, firstly, we find that as of now, the center is having one-size-fits-all policies, which is making the various diverse states very difficult to implement the same. Also, the local factor, the local concerns are sometimes not incorporated. We also find that it is leading to lesser amount of local autonomy over a period of time, where the local bodies are not having proper amount of powers. Next, the states are also replicating the central schemes with no innovation, with no other kind of modifications by the state on their own, because the states sometimes they have been seen that they try to copy paste the central initiatives in the scheme, while it is actually always understandable that the state governments are actually cognizable of the local levels, local issues, where they must be trying to tailor the various central initiatives according to their state specific needs, but that is not happening. Next, we also have the various basic needs which are sometimes ignored. The government right now is focused on constructing high cost infrastructure such as airports and so on. What will happen to the various other kinds of social infrastructure that we need, such as schools, hospitals, and the various colleges and so on, institutions which we need for the better amount of human capital? So with reference to physical capital, sometimes we also undermine the need for human capital. And here this brings us to the next issue, that a lot of funds are wasted due to corruption issues, due to red tapeism, due to also non-availability of expertise and skilled enterprises. And finally, we also have rigid planning which are set from the center itself. That is why we need a particular solution in this particular matter, which is proposed by the editorial author. Now, these particular solutions have been divided into various sections. The first is about financial devolution reform, where the author is advocating that out of the 100% funds, right, 70% of the urban funds to be directly transferred to the states, right, and the states must be having greater amount of autonomy, because here the author also argues that the state finance commissions should be determining and also should be trying to advise how these particular grants can be spent for urban development, and here that the rest of the 30% can be retained for various other national priorities. Next, we also need a decentralized need-based planning, that the planning must be decentralized at the local levels, where the local members, the ward members and everyone and their aspirations, the local communities, their aspirations must be factored into. And finally, the infrastructure and everything that we need to have in a particular urban area, right, that must be particularly based on the need-based approach. That is, we must be having the need for them, then only we must be trying to go ahead. That is why we have to factor in the various city-specific fund allocation, because various cities in the entire country, right, they will be having some specific needs. We have to focus on those need-based approach first. Next, the local government should be also having some targets of investment. They must be having the agent of investing in those public services which are extremely crucial for the public. And finally, the various knowledge agencies that we have, for example, say the Niti Aayog, right, they must be having better amount of research and data-driven policy making in the same. Finally, at the very end, last but not the least, we have to try to empower the local governance, where we have to mainly underscore the importance of city governance as the primary decision maker, so that the state governments are needed to devolve various power to the urban local bodies. And this is actually a perennial issue when we talk about the fund, functionaries and functions issues in the urban local bodies and also in the rural local bodies, where we find that the funds, functions and the functionaries are not up to the mark when we actually talk about the need for effective local body implementation of various policies. Next, we also need a better amount of community participation, such as we can have some Sundays, we can have some weeks in some particular urban areas where there can be participatory budget, where people can participate in their wards. They can actually discuss with the various ward members, they can communicate their needs and they can try to participate in the finances and the various expenditure aspects. Finally, we must be trying to pave way for flexible, demand-driven governance, not a particular top-to-down approach. So that is what we have to focus on, creating more locally driven development and efficient distribution of various allocation of resources, and finally sustainable and inclusive growth. Now mind this, particular tags or lines or particular phrases are extremely important for your mains examination, particularly when we talk about urbanization and the various challenges associated with the same. So that is why try to use these keywords, whatever things we have discussed in this mains practice question. You can comment your answer in the particular comment section below, and also always try to integrate various new ways of writing answers, correct? So that is where we can now move on to the simplified section. In this topic, we are going to understand what are heat action plans and how it is relevant for the country. It is extremely crucial for our prelims to study this topic from the perspective of climate change and also from the perspective of environmental pollution and degradation for our GS3 mains. Now, when I talk about this heat action plan, here I cannot ignore the topic of heat waves. Now, heat waves we actually covered over a period of time in the previous sessions also. So that is why right now I will be giving a very brief recap. Now, when I talk about what causes a heat wave, it is generally an area of high pressure region. Now, whenever we have an area of high pressure region, we generally do not have any other kind of winds prevailing in this region. That is why this makes the particular region extremely dry, and also this region experiences high temperature, because whatever the wind is circulating between this high pressure region, it remains within this region itself. So it is effectively creating a dome where the rising high temperatures, right, due to the sun, that creates the air parcels to rise, but it gets trapped due to this high pressure region, forming a kind of a dome of heat, right, in this particular region. So that is where, according to official definitions that is given by the National Disaster Management Authority, heat wave is a condition of abnormally high temperature where we have the temperature more than the normal maximum temperatures that occurs during the summer season in the northwestern parts of India. And generally we have the season between March to June when we have the heat waves as of now, but in rare cases it also extends to mid-monsoon period, that is up to July. And that is why in recent newspaper reports we have seen so many cases where we have some research, some evidence, even the IMD suggesting that the coming months will be having high temperatures across the entire country. And here we also need to know the IMD criteria of classifying the heat waves. Generally, IMD criteria focuses on two things. Firstly, the maximum temperature and the recorded temperature. When we talk about the maximum temperature, it is generally divided into two, that is the temperature at hills and the plain regions, where we have the deviation between 4 degree to 6 degree of, say, apart from the maximum temperature, we have a heat wave condition, right? Also, when we talk about, say, the severe heat wave condition, it is generally 6 degrees or 7 degrees or more, correct? When we talk about the severe heat wave conditions. And when we talk about the other parameter, it is via the recorded temperature. Whenever the temperature is exceeding 45 degrees Celsius in any area, right, it is a general normal heat wave condition. And whenever it is exceeding 47 degrees Celsius, we have the severe heat wave condition. And all of these things must be attributable to some conditions. That is, this particular heat wave declaration can only be made if in those regions we have such conditions for at least 2 days or more. And that is where we need to understand what is a heat action plan. Now we know that heat action plan is actually trying to give us early warning system and a proper amount of preparedness plan. Now according to government documents, this particular heat action plan presents immediate as well as longer term action to increase preparedness, information sharing and response coordination to reduce the health impacts of extreme heat on vulnerable population. We know that heat waves causes a loss of consciousness, also confusion and dry skin, and very high temperature sometimes leads to heart disease, kidney diseases, and particularly harmful for children and pregnant women. That is why this heat action plan is trying to have a comprehensive kind of a planning to mitigate the heat related events. And that is why we understand that NDMA is implementing the heat wave action plan in around 23 states in the country. And also this is with reference to the collaboration that the NDMA is doing with the state governments and even with the district administration, where the key components of the heat wave action plan, across the entire states, firstly to give heat wave forecast to the people to let them be aware of the pending heat wave incidents. Secondly, it is also via the various SMS, via various calls which are made via various public alerts by the government of the particular states. Then also it is about training the medical staff for heat wave conditions, where patients, we have seen in the last year also in 2024, we have had so many cases at our hospitals which related to heat wave conditions between these summer months. Also, this particular plan takes into the consideration of having various cooling stations such as a bus stand like say infrastructure, where we have ACs and various water stations fitted within the cooling centers at various urban areas. Also, there are proper amount of guidelines on what are the heat related diseases, and also various tree plantation drives which are needed to have better amount of green spaces in the urban areas. Finally, it is also about having a proper amount of green and say heat compliant infrastructure for the urban houses, government offices and so on. That is where we need to have better amount of cool roofs, green spaces and shaded walkways, which also reduce the impact of the urban heat island effect, which is an effect which is prominently seen in the urban areas, where generally during the night times we see more than normal temperatures due to the high amount of heat which is released by the concrete during the night. So here we need to focus on the study, the various challenges of the heat wave action plan in the country. Now this study is actually from a Delhi-based research institute known as the Sustainable Futures Collaborative. And here the main authors are actually coming from various established universities too. What they have analyzed is that they have tried to understand all the 9 cities which had this kind of heat wave action plan, but still they did not have long-term emergency kind of measures. They had short-term measures, but the long-term measures were either absent or very poorly implemented. Correct? They are talking that long-term measures such as making households or occupations cooling available to most heat exposed people, developing insurance cover for lost work, expanding fire management services, and so on. These are long-term solutions which are not undertaken. Correct? Also actions like the expansion of urban shade and green shade cover and creation of various open green spaces, these are also not implemented on a regular level and without focusing on populations and areas that have the greatest heat risk. Also we have to understand that these long-term strategies that were being implemented in some of the areas were focused largely on the health system and not on prevention, that is having these green spaces and so on. That is why more funding was required to implement the long-term approaches. Correct? And that is where the top problem which was identified by the various respondents in this survey was local coordination too. That the local bodies are not trying to collaborate or say having proper amount of coordination to have a better heat wave action plan. That is where we have to understand the challenges are such that the various socio-economic classes of the people are also not taken into considerations, where some areas can have some slum areas which have more vulnerability toward the heat wave, so the real-time data is not sometimes available. Also they are static in nature, that means they do not evolve over a period of time. Next, they also have very weak legal backing, and finally inconsistent methods are being implemented across the states where there is not a particular uniform strategy to be implemented at various state governments. So these are the various challenges that we need to keep in mind when we talk about this article specifically. And that is what brings me to this 2010 PYQ, which is talking about what are the possible limitations of India mitigating the global warming at present in the immediate future. So you let me know what is the answer in the comments below. In the next article, we are going to understand the concept of permafrost, where according to a recent study, around 64.8% of Jammu and Kashmir and Ladakh is covered with permafrost. So we are going to discuss in this article what exactly is permafrost, because from the perspective of climate change and conservation from prelims and GS3 respectively, we need to be aware of such important conditions which are taking place due to climate change. Typically, when I talk about what is a permafrost, when we talk about the official definition, it is actually any ground that can be composed of soil, rock, or any other sediments which are permanently frozen, and for at least 2 consecutive years. These are known as permafrost regions. And here when we talk about the various types of permafrost, there are 3 types. There's continuous, discontinuous, and sporadic, based on the percentage of the ground that is frozen. That means that we have, for example, in continuous types of permafrost, we have 90% of the ground which is frozen. So what is happening with the 10%? The 10% of the ground is actually home to various organic matters such as this. Right? So it can be home to various organic matters such as microbes, various amounts of microorganisms, fungi, and so on. So these microorganisms are actually indeed trapped between the various layers of soil and the permafrost. So this is what we have to understand, that permafrosts are extremely important for their natural ecosystems. If permafrosts are, in Jammu and Kashmir and Ladakh, or if most of the world's permafrost are naturally found in the Arctic region, around the entire regions of US, Canada, and also mainly in Russia, where we find these are extremely important because they are massive storage reserves of carbon dioxide. That is, within these spots below the soil, we have massive organic matter which is stored. Once, if at all, the ice above melts, there can be massive amounts of carbon dioxide which can be released into the atmosphere. That is why this particular permafrost keep the carbon dioxide trapped within our soil. Next, it is also the permafrost which is trying to act as forming a glue between the rocks and the soil. So this glue is trying to maintain the integrity of the mountains, where the entire kind of rocks and soil are having this particular layers between themselves, and their particular structural integrity is maintained. Finally, this also influences water cycles, because time and again the natural melting of permafrost leads to various amounts of rivers all around the world. So the water cycle is also kind of maintained in this particular matter. But as of now, in recent times, we have incidents of rising amount of permafrost melting. That is a condition when, due to higher amount of global warming, we have the surface temperatures which are rising. Now the surface ice which is present here, they are melting, and this is leading to the permafrost being heating up from inside. And whenever they are heated up from inside, this frozen organic matter, they actually come at normal temperature and they are emitted in the atmosphere. Not only the carbon dioxide that we also have various dangerous amounts of microbes, diseases, virus, bacteria, fungi which are trapped inside. If at all they are exposed, they can lead to accelerated amount of global warming, more new pandemics, more new emerging diseases in the entire world. That is where we understand that this particular permafrost melting is extremely harmful for the entire world. And why is the permafrost melting in recent times? Primarily, it is global warming. Also, we have various other human activities, for example, deforestation, which is leading to lesser shade on these particular areas. This is leading to faster thawing of the region. Construction activities is disturbing the frozen ground, leading the organic matter below exposed. And finally, wildfires darkens the various surfaces by leaving soot on the surface. And we always know that due to albedo effect, right? Whenever we have darker surfaces, these darker surfaces absorb more heat. So we have poor albedo effect in these regions as of now. And when we talk about the consequences of this thawing, these are extremely severe. When we talk about the environmental impact, this actually lead to an effect known as carbon bomb effect, which releases a lot of methane and carbon dioxide, and this creates a positive feedback loop in the entire environment. That means that imagine that you are studying and suddenly you feel like watching Instagram reels, and over a period of time you are just scrolling and scrolling and scrolling. That means this positive feedback loop is, or say your excitement or the content that you are getting from Instagram reel is actually making you hooked onto that particular content. The same thing happens here, that once these methane and carbon dioxides are emitted into the atmosphere, they actually try to warm up the entire planet, and that itself leads to global warming. And again, global warming leads to more permafrost, and permafrost leads to more global warming. In this manner, this is a positive feedback loop which is continuing, which is extremely harmful for the environment. And some of the instances that we can see, mainly from the glacial lake outburst floods in the recent times. For example, in the Jammu and Kashmir Valley, 65 out of 332 pro-glacial lakes are extremely fragile to this particular GLOFs. As we have also seen in 2023, the case of Lonak Lake in Sikkim, where due to this GLOF, we have seen these particular floods which took place. Next, they also pose risk for landslides and rock ice avalanches, which are much more dangerous than normal ice avalanches, right? As we have also seen in the Chamoli disaster of 2021 that took place in Uttarakhand. Apart from that, we also have so many other socio-economic risks, such as infrastructural damage, water security threats, and hydropower vulnerability. So that is why we need to plan for permafrost. That is why whenever we are talking about roads, we should be very well aware of the construction of the roads and then the impacts that the infrastructure creation can lead to melting of the permafrost. That is why we need to have a proper planning of the same. Also, when we talk about the environment impact assessments, they must be done with due consideration in respect to the environment, particularly with the permafrost regions. Definitely in the Jammu and Kashmir, we have seen that almost 65% of the land is prone to permafrost. That is why we should not be trying to disturb those regions, correct? Because due to projects like hydroelectric power projects and so on, they can lead to this GLOFs and so on, which are the negative consequences here. And finally, when we talk about the various other things that we need to do, we need to also understand the effects of the same on the households in this region, and they generally will be facing emerging threats of new diseases and new pollutants in the region. Also in Ladakh, steep slopes containing permafrost are home to residential settlements, so we should not be disturbing them. And mainly when we talk about this Jammu and Kashmir region and Ladakh region, the strategic importance is very important to consider for the country. That is why many strategic roads are actually passing through this kind of zones, and these roads leads to various kinds of connectivity to other habitation regions. So that is why we must be properly trying to plan the roads accordingly so that they do not affect the permafrost in the regions. Apart from that, we need to have proper amount of satellite monitoring of land surface temperatures so that we can have proper amount of tracking. As of now, we do not have proper amount of in situ monitoring in this region. So whatever we are trying to track, we are tracking from our satellites itself. So that is why we further need to have data loggers or various local stations to look into these particular conditions. And that is what brings me to this PYQs from 2019 and mains PYQ from 2021. You try to solve this and let me know what is the answer in the comments. And also when we talk about the mains PYQ of 2021, here also based on the various Arctic and the Antarctic issues, we have seen, right, we can include the points of permafrost when we are trying to substantiate our answer in this particular topic. In this topic, guys, we are going to understand what do we mean by DNA polymorphisms, which is an extremely important topic for our general science topics in our prelims, and also awareness in the fields of science and tech, particularly biotechnology, for our mains examination. Now, when I talk about the DNA, we have to look into the structure here very closely. Each and every cell has this DNA which is known as the deoxyribonucleic acid, and here every particular cell has a nucleus in which we also have the chromosomes, and generally the chromosomes are made of the DNA, and any particular strand of the DNA, any segment of the DNA is actually known as the gene. And based on this, the DNA have various bases, the nitrogenous bases, which are known as adenine, guanine, thymine and cytosine. So these are very basics here where we have to understand the most important topics in this article. Firstly, here, the article is talking about polymorphisms, which are the small variations in DNA sequences that actually lead to identification of the variations between the various individuals. So, these actually lead to make us various distinctions from various human beings. So here the concept of short tandem repeats become extremely important, which are nothing but repeating DNA sequences. For example, look at this particular sequences. Don't you see that these sequences are repeating? Now the nature of these repetitions determine how similar or how different we are from each other human beings. So that is why the number of repetitions varies between individuals, and unrelated people will have different STR lengths, different STR sequences. So here, that is why this is kind of, don't you think, giving us one hint where we can actually understand that each of the DNA or say the tandem repeats here, we find it unique based on person to person. That is why this is giving the rise to DNA fingerprinting, which is just like the Aadhaar card that we have. We have some numbers, right, unique numbers for our Aadhaar card. For this also we have unique biological identifiers based on the short tandem repeats. This is based on our genetic codes, but there is one exception here, that for our identical twins are the only people with the same DNA fingerprint. Correct? Now, when we talk about this concept, let us also solve some of the PYQs here from 2022 and 2019, where the 2022 is asking about the following statements about how this DNA barcoding can be a very important tool for the following purposes or not. So let us understand here, firstly, how DNA fingerprinting is actually taking place. The very first step is DNA extraction using your blood, saliva, from your hair or old bones or teeth. After this, we actually do something which we know as polymerase chain reaction, where the main purpose is whatever the sample that we collected, we need to multiply this sample into large numbers. We need to have billions of DNA copies in 1 to 2 hours to actually understand the DNA composition, correct? So that is where we firstly try to heat it up, which is known as a process of denaturation, where the DNA strands are actually divided into 2 strands, that the DNA is trying to unzip. Next, we also try to cool it after we heat it, that is known as annealing, where there are various primers which are sticking to these particular strands, and finally these primers actually give the location where we have to copy the DNA. After this, we have extension process, which is again try to warming it slightly. This particular process will be creating billions of copies. After the same, we have the step 3, where we have capillary electrophoresis. This capillary electrophoresis is trying to have the DNA fragments which are separated by their sizes, and accordingly we have the various technologies such as lasers, which can detect the sizes, which can detect the code here, and finally will be helping us going to step 4 by creating a particular DNA profile based on the various short tandem repeat lengths, which are actually recorded for around 13 to 20 genetic markers or various identifiers, correct? For example, if you can look at it, these are the following DNA markers, and this can actually help us look into whether we have more similarities with the father, mother, or particularly any other individual. So generally we have this kind of particular mechanism of DNA fingerprinting, where one of the main purpose is also to look at various paternal, maternal, ancestral origins too. So this table is actually looking at DNA fingerprinting, which we can understand are unique to each and every person. So that is what brings us to the applications of DNA fingerprinting. Firstly, this can establish parent-child relationships, which are kind of popular in various Hindi TV serial shows in the country, right? This also help us identify individuals from their mortal remains at various disaster sites, correct? Also, we have various crime scenes where this can be used in forensic sciences. This can also help us to identify or exclude various potential donors during organ donations also. This can also lead us to various archaeological excavations, finding various discoveries, right, from the ancient remains of various ancestors, correct? And finally, they have also helped in the past for various medical diagnosis, right, and various other applications in food industry, particularly when we talk about food safety too. Correct? So that is where we have the various applications of the DNA fingerprinting here. Now we'll be moving on to the next one. Now guys, in the next article we are going to discuss the bullet train project, because recently this is in the news because of a recent accident that took place at the construction site. It is extremely important for general science for prelims because of the technology involved, and for GS3 for the railways because it pertains to the infrastructural sector. Now, in India, the bullet train implementation, construction and everything is monitored and overseen by the National High Speed Rail Corporation Limited, where it is trying to have a proper amount of 508 kilometers of bullet train railway track that is connecting Ahmedabad and Mumbai, which will be reducing the span of time that usually takes from 7 to 8 hours to 2.07 hours only. And here, firstly, we need to understand the technology behind the same. It involves two concepts of physics when it pertains to magnets, that is levitation and propulsion. You see, this bullet train will be held in the air by repelling magnets, that is, they will be using like poles of the magnets where the train will be afloat. Now, when it comes to the matter as to how the trains will be going forward, it will be possible by the usage of various magnets based on their like and unlike poles. They will be switching between like and unlike poles to actually propel the train forward. So this is how this entire maglev trains are actually trying to operate using the core science behind magnets, which is an incredible feat of science and technology, where in India the bullet train can actually reach up to speeds of 350 kilometers per hour, where Now, when we talk about the details of this particular project, it is using Shinkansen technology, which is a technology of Japan, which is actually built at the cost of around 108,000 crores, which is a huge amount. But here, 81% will be coming from the Japanese soft loans at extremely low interest rate. And here, when we talk about the electric multiple units, these are the various bogies of the, say, bullet trains, which will be having their own independent electric systems to run the various apparatus to propel the train forward, which will be making it much more efficient. And finally, it is also having regenerative braking. That means whatever the braking forces it will be trying to have, it will be using the kinetic energy which is generated during the braking, and it will be converting energy for the propulsion purposes too. And finally, when we talk about the various other facilities, it is having an aerodynamic shape which is trying to reduce the wind shear. It is also having automatic train control, earthquake detection, and pressure sealed cabins too. So this is where we need to understand the various technologies involved. Apart from this, when Japan is actually trying to construct and give external and internal technological guidance on this bullet train, it is also trying to counter China's Belt and Road Initiative via this particular project. Now, when we talk about the progress report card as of now, we have seen that most of the land acquisition in Gujarat, Danda, Nagar Haveli have been done along with Maharashtra. Also, the various engineering contracts have been particularly devolved. This will be also be leading to India's first undersea railway tunnel, which is around 7 kilometers will be which will be visualized in Mumbai, for which the construction work has already started. Despite that, we have some of the issues as of now, that we actually had a 2023 deadline. As of now, it has been postponed to 2028-30. Correct, due to various amount of land acquisition, say causes here, which are some of leading to various delays, court issues, and so on. Correct, where we have to understand most of the land acquisition cases matters are actually pending. Also, this particular route is going and cutting through the various ecologically sensitive areas, where it can lead to lesser amount of ecological diversity in the particular region. Finally, due to high amount of costs, it has also posed questions on whether we are financially viable to launch this project commercially. And finally, the construction of the same will be leading to lots of displacements of the various local peoples there. So these are the various things that we need to discuss, and the various issues, challenges, features of this particular project. Now I will be moving to the PYQ of 2013, where we do not have a direct relation between the bullet trains here, but there is a question between the various forces of nature, the four forces of nature: gravity, electromagnetism, weak nuclear force, and strong nuclear force. You let me know what is the answer of the same in the comments below. Finally, in the last article, we are going to discuss about a recent initiative by the government of India to actually understand the various incidents of TB cases in the country. This is extremely important for general science topic of prelims and GS2 topic of health, where firstly, we have to look into the context that the Department of Biotech under the Ministry of Science and Technology have completed the genomic sequence of a third, or around 10,000 samples of the Mycobacterium tuberculosis, which is the main bacteria, main agent behind tuberculosis disease, which is actually, this initiative is actually trying to have a proper amount of understanding of the drug-resistant TB. Now, when we talk about the drug-resistant TB, there are various types here. Firstly, we have mono drug-resistance TB, where we have some very basic drugs which do not work against the TB cure. Secondly, we have the polyresistance, where we have some of the other important drugs also which are not working against the particular cure or prevention of TB. But here we are not including various important TB related drugs such as the isoniazid and rifampicin. Apart from this, we have the multi-drug resistant TB, which are actually that kind of TB where not even these two drugs are working right now. After this, finally, we have extensively drug-resistant TB, which is not responding to normal drugs, the above drugs, and also any one of these particular drugs too. But what are the causes of such drug resistance? That is why it is that the TB right now have evolved to a nature normal drugs do not even work. That is where bring us to the two important causes. Firstly, we have incomplete or proper treatment of TB at various hospitals and so on, where people do not even take the proper amount of dosage or say doctor's prescription of the various drugs, due to which the bacteria has evolved to such extent that they are evolved or they are actually not responding to these normal medications. Finally, they can also lead to direct transmission, such as a patient with multi-drug resistant TB can be in touch with any other person, and that particular very serious kind of say drug resistant TB can be transmitted via direct transmission to the people. So that is why this Dare2eraD becomes very important. Now, the government is trying to collect the data as to how many people are having various types of drug resistant TB. So that is why the genomic sequence is important. The full form of the same is data driven research to eradicate TB. Correct? So this is where this initiative is trying to have data collection to look into the goal of eradication of TB in the country, where as of now this was launched in 2022 and the main goal was to complete to 32,500 samples. So that is what we have to understand. This is the main aspect or say the main target of Government of India, to look into how exactly are the persons when we talk about the distribution of TB or distribution of drug resistant TB. Because in 2018, our Prime Minister at the End TB Summit told that India would eradicate tuberculosis in the country by 2025. And when we talk about eradication, according to WHO, eradication means a disease is actually, or say the number of patients affected with the disease is close to zero. Correct? But as per the latest estimates, India has around 1900 cases or 2000 cases in 2022. Correct? It is actually down from around 2300 cases around in 2015. But we have to understand India accounts for 28% of the new TB cases worldwide, and these are generally the cases where we have clinically confirmed. So there can be some other cases which are not even confirmed, which can push the current number of 2000 around 1990 to 3000 per million. That is a cause of concern, and that is exactly why we are trying to have a proper understanding of what is the extent of TB in the country. Correct? So that is why the 9 labs of DBT, right, the CSIR, the ICMR is actually trying to converge on understanding the nature and incidence of tuberculosis in the country. And this is also a part of the consortium known as the Indian Tuberculosis Genomic Surveillance, and this is generally expected to be completed by October 2025. So this was all for this article, and this is another PYQ for all of you to solve and let me know in the comments below. And at the very end, I thank you all for being an extremely patient audience. Please do attempt the quiz which is following up. Till we meet again, all the best and best of luck. Thank you.